Today, we're looking at session number 4 in our series of the Jubilee, God's Jubilee, entitled The Kinsman Redeemer and Levirate Marriage. As we've discussed before, the notion of God's Jubilee involves activities that require different persons of responsibility to perform. That's not strange. Every time something happens, somebody has to get involved, somebody has to do something. And with family, clans, and so forth, that same thing is true in God's Jubilee. Identity regarding national, tribal, clan, and family was a big deal in Israel at that time, in that era. Individual responsibilities in such matters as we're going to discuss were part of law, and they were part of cultural expectations. There were generally 3 tasks that we're going to be talking about over the next couple sessions or so. The first is the task of the kinsman redeemer. Typically, and when somebody has a need, there will be some closest relative responsible to help with that. Then we have the question of the levirate, Levirate. It's in connection with levirate marriage. Levirate itself just refers to brother or brother-in-law. And in our next session, we're going to talk about the role of the blood avenger, or as it's most commonly called, the avenger of blood. He's not out for blood specifically, but he is out to avenge the blood of another close relative. All those men in those 3 settings were blood relatives, likely the closest relative to the one having a need that he or she can't personally meet. The responsible person in our first case was called Goel, G-O''E-L. Goel in Hebrew, Redeemer in English, known in Israel as the kinsman redeemer. Kinsman meaning the blood relative closest to you, who is the Goel. The role of the Goel was generally to protect the rights, the property, and the person of a blood relative unable to do so himself or herself. Again, that is going to be coming up over and over again. Remember that you don't remember that, but do you remember that the land allotments provided after the conquest of Canaan, what were they intended to do? They were intended by Yahweh to be permanent, national, tribal, clan, and family inheritances. An assignment of land made during the book of Joshua to a particular family was to remain the land of that family permanently. Well, life's events don't always let that happen, particularly those life events that resulted in poverty or personal bondage of some sort. And it required societal rules and laws to deal with them. If you're in a position where you have to have some, money, I'm just going to get crass about it, you require some money you don't have, or you can't take care of some event or person or life that needs it. So what do? The typical thing is the greatest thing of value that you have for such a situation would be your land. So do you sell it? Well, if you sell it, you no longer own it, right? And there's a problem. If you no longer own it, then God's intent for it to be permanently yours is out the window. But how are we going to deal with that? Well, that's part of what we're going to talk about. Yahweh provided for such events through the kinsman redeemer, levirate marriage, his Jubilee, and other mechanisms. So God did provide for those eventualities. He's not caught up short, folks. So let's begin by recognizing the notion that every Israelite normally, not always, but normally, routinely, had an ordered list of male relatives qualified and charged to act as kinsman redeemer for that man or woman. The list was normally ordered by closeness of the blood relationship. The person at the head of that list is often perform several of these different tasks that we've been talking about. The role of the kinsman redeemer, the role of the levirate brother, and the avenger of blood. The same person might perform all three of those. Again, the idea was to protect and maintain the integrity of land allotments, protect and maintain the family name and line. You don't want a family line falling off the charts because there's no offspring to continue that family line name. You want to deal with Yahweh's decrees concerning the shedding of blood and the corruption of the land. Those two were connected by Yahweh's decree. Well, as a part of all of that, women who would be very vulnerable if they were older, unmarried, older, widowed, so forth, or even orphans might be considered in that same way. They were very vulnerable. I'll get it spit out in a minute here. But they had, generally, a woman had some male relative that we would say is responsible for her. But we need to first recognize something. So would we say every woman in Israel has a goel? In a sense, yes. But it didn't always work out, and there are reasons for that too. But the first thing to be settled is who was the goel, however you want to pronounce it. Who was the goel for the nation Israel? Well, it was supposed to be Yahweh. So we need to recognize that God was Israel's true goel. Then each person in Israel theoretically had a human goel. Actually, probably had a list of people who could perform as goel. So let me read something from Isaiah 41. Most of you know by now that Isaiah 40 through 49 is a big part of my favorite section, one of my favorite sections of Scripture. We're looking at Isaiah 41, going to look at verses 12, 13, and 14. It says this, "For I am Yahweh your God, who upholds your right hand. I'm responsible for you. I take care of you. Who says to you, do not fear, I will help you. Do not fear, you worm Jacob, you men of Israel, I will help you, declares Yahweh. And your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. Your Goel is Yahweh. Jeremiah 50:34 extends some of the same idea. There, that's Israel's, Redeemer is strong. Yahweh of hosts is his name. He will vigorously plead their case so that he may bring rest to the earth, but turmoil to the inhabitants of Babylon. Jeremiah was writing, of course, right before and prophesying about Babylon's destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, and his defeat of Judah. So what was Jeremiah saying? You have a Goel, Israel. Don't sweat it. This discipline will be over. Well, wow, watch out. Wait and see, because Babylon's going to pay a heavy price for their part in this discipline. If you check, again, in chapters 40 through 49, you find God at least 7 times referred to as Israel's Redeemer. And most of those will be out of Yahweh's own mouth, his own words about himself. He said, look, you guys, you're not out here by yourself. I'm here. But let's begin with the redemption of land sold. The case that we talked about earlier may come because of poverty, because of some kind of need. You have to sell your land. That's the only way you can gain any money or value to deal with your problem. So keep in mind that this same principle held, the one of wanting the property to be yours permanently, this same principle held when one had sold himself into servanthood or slavery. So, again, we're talking about poverty being some form of oppression, and you either lose your land or you lose your freedom, in the sense that if you're not a pure slave, you're at least an indentured servant. So let's look at what is said in Leviticus 25 about this. That's the Jubilee chapter, of course. I'm looking at verses 24 through 27 this time. Thus, for every piece of your property, the ones allotted after the conquest of Canaan, you are to provide for the redemption of the land. So what's God saying up front? If you have to sell it, there's got to be some means related to your ability to redeem that land, to get it back at some point in time. If a fellow countryman of yours becomes so poor he has to sell part of his property, then his nearest kinsman, there we are, the nearest kinsman is to come and buy back. That is redeem, right? Buy back is a form of redemption. Then his nearest kinsman, his kinsman redeemer, is to come and buy back what his relative has sold. You can't do it. Maybe you've got somebody on this kinsman redeemer list who can, so they will. Or in case a man has no kinsman, it's possible, but so recovers his means as to find sufficient for its redemption. In other words, if somehow you get to a new state where you can buy it back, then verse 27, he shall calculate the years since its sale and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it, and so return to his property. So the idea was, if you have to temporarily sell part of your land to deal with the problem you have, then at some point along the way, either you or your kinsman redeemer will buy it back so you may return to ownership and to use of your own property. It's a little iffy yet. There's still some things about God's Jubilee we haven't gotten into yet that will deal with what happens if you do not have a kinsman redeemer capable of repurchasing the land, or what if you cannot ever get to that state. Then what? Well, that's where the Jubilee is going to come in. You see that a bit in the middle of this, and verse 27 said, "Then he shall calculate the years since its sale." If it's going to be purchased back, you have to figure out something about a number of years. Well, that's where the Jubilee is going to come in. We'll talk about that later. So keep in mind what redemption involved. Someone had to pay a price to release the redeemed land, to release the land that you sold. Somebody has to pay a price to redeem that back, to buy it back, or a person free from some claim of another. Because it could not be, it might not be your land, it might be your freedom has to be purchased back. But that's what redemption is. There's a claim against land or yourself that has to be met. And that claim usually involves payment of some kind of fee. So that's where we're going with this. Redemption involved land or person under obligation to the claim of someone else. A man, the one owing the debt, or the kinsman redeemer if the debtor can't. This is going to be either the kinsman redeemer or the debtor himself who pays back the debt. And then the size of the debt is to be determined by the conditions. Buying back or releasing from the claim that which was under obligation. So that's what the buying back is. It's a releasing from the previous claim of the one who bought it, or him, her, that which was under obligation. In other words, there is a buying back of some debt, some paying off of some debt. Not terribly complicated. It's going to get a little bit more so, but it's pretty simple. You owe somebody something. Someone has to pay it to buy it back or to redeem it. Is that going to be the goel, your goel, or is it going to be you? Or is there a third option? And the answer is yes, there is a third option. Now, the book of Ruth offers a clear example of this goel, kinsman redeemer, in play, and some of the problems with it, and we're going to look at that. Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, was in need of money to provide for her and her daughters-in-law, right, okay. So Naomi was in financial problems. She needed money. So she was going to have to remember, how's she going to do this? Well, where's her husband? Well, they moved, Naomi's family moved from Israel to Moab during some time of hardship. Her husband's name was Elimelech, And Elimelech died while they were in Moab. He died, and he had 2 sons. You say, well, there's the kinsman redeemer, there's the Levirate, there's everybody. 2 sons, right? Well, wrong. Because his 2 sons, who married women, Ruth, one, and Orpah, another. So both sons married, but both sons subsequently died also while they were in Moab. So now there is no close male relative of Naomi in Moab. So what does she have to do? If she's going to be anything other than a penniless widow, along with her 2 daughters-in-law who would be penniless widows, she had to move back to Israel. Why? Well, think about it. It was in Israel that this notion of kinsman redeemer was in play. The scripture doesn't say that's why she goes back, but in my own mind it seems reasonable that that would be her first thought. I can't do anything here. I'm in big trouble here, so I'm going to have to go back. Now, additional problem. Neither son had sons in their marriage to Ruth or Orpah. So there were no males to continue Elimelech's family name. So the name of Elimelech was about to disappear from the earth. Nobody to continue his family name. Now, back in Israel, though, Naomi needed to sell Elimelech's land for money because she was in poverty. So at best, she would sell the land to a kinsman redeemer himself directly so that the land wouldn't go out from the family. But what if that was not possible? What if the family could not purchase it at the time, or she had no connections? Otherwise, she could sell to someone outside the family and hope that she could find a kinsman redeemer who could buy it back for the family at some point. So the kinsman redeemer list for Naomi came into play. In this example, we're going to see both the notion of kinsman redeemer and that ordered list from which he was to be chosen. Let's look at Ruth chapter 3, where this begins to take shape, verses 12 and 13. And this is Boaz, who is turns out a relative of Naomi. But he's not the closest relative. So let's keep that in mind. And now Boaz is speaking to Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth. And remember, Orpah went back to her father's house, which was typical. If a woman became widowed, her father, if able, was to pick back up his responsibility for her. And that's what happened in Orpah's case. But Ruth went with Naomi. So Ruth, like Naomi, is a widow with no close, and she has no close relative in Israel, right? Naomi does, Ruth does not. And here's what Boaz says to Ruth. And now it's true, I am a close relative. And of course he means of Naomi. However, there is a relative closer than I. Remain this night, and when morning comes, if he, the one who's number 1 on Naomi's list for kinsman redeemer, if he will redeem you, good, let him redeem you. Now he's talking about Ruth. So there's some extra complication here. But the kinsman redeemer was be responsible for redeeming Naomi's land. But if he does not wish to redeem you, Ruth, then I will redeem you as Yahweh lives. And then if we jump to chapter 4, the first 4 verses there, we see, now Boaz went up to the gate, this would be the city gate, and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke, the one he spoke to, Ruth, was passing by. So he said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. Now he obviously knew who the guy was. He turned aside, the guy did, turned aside and sat down. And Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city, wanted some witnesses, right? And he said, Boaz said, sit down here. So the 10 sat down. Then he said to the closest relative, the one who was first in line for kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here. And now, before the elders of my people. So there was evidently some kind of a crowd around. So he said, they're going to hear what you say. These 10 elders are here, and they're going to hear what you say. If you will redeem it, the land, redeem the land. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. Evidently, Boaz was second in line, and he said, I will redeem it if you won't. Well, Naomi needed for a kinsman to buy Elimelech's land, either buy it from whoever she sold it to or buy it himself. Boaz was a relative who could act as kinsman redeemer, but he was number 2 on the list. So Boaz properly put the case before number 1, who eventually declined to act fully as kinsman redeemer. So far, we haven't heard from him. We will in a second. Because the case was done in a public setting, Boaz was free to act as the kinsman redeemer if number 1 refuses. And it turns out he did. We'll talk about that in a minute, too. Did you catch the significance of Boaz's act? Boaz provided substitutionary payment for Naomi's land. So this was a substitutionary redemption. Those words ought to bring something to remind you of. But there remained the problem of no offspring to continue Elimelech's family name. So there's where the second part comes in. God had provided for a solution when a woman's husband dies without any sons to carry on the family name. We can go back to Deuteronomy 25 and look at verses 5 and 6. This is where the notion of Levirate marriage is put forth. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son. He leaves no one to carry on his family name. The wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man, because if she did, any son born to her would become a continuation of that man's, her second husband's name, not her first husband's name. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife. There's the levirate marriage. The levirate, the brother of the husband who died, shall go in, take the wife, the widow, as his own wife, and take her to himself, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. So this is to be an actual physical marriage. Verse 6, and it shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother. So here you have the levirate brother-in-law. This is speaking of it. Turns out they weren't always brothers-in-law, same problem again, right? When the levirate produces a male child, the first male child for the woman, that male child is considered the son of the dead husband, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. Now, who are we talking about here? Naomi? She's old to the point she's not going to produce children to continue the line of Elimelech. But who can continue the line of Elimelech? That is the wife of the dead son Mahlon, and her name is Ruth. The notion of the dead man's brother being the progenitor of a son in the name of the dead husband was in effect extended on beyond brothers to uncles or other close relative, and who, if this guy that Boaz is speaking to refuses to be the closest blood relative effectively, then Boaz can step in and perform that role. So Boaz would then be qualified, if you please, to not only purchase back or purchase Naomi's land as the kinsman redeemer, but he would be qualified to act as the levirate brother-in-law also. So what do we have? Why did it extend beyond brother? Well, there may not have been a brother. It could have only been one son of this man available, and he died. So might not be a brother. So it was extended to the same notion as kinsman redeemer. So this wasn't always something that a brother also wished to do. And we're going to see that in the case of this man, who probably was not a brother, may have been, we don't know, but the guy just may have said, no, I can't do that. So he could refuse, theoretically, or otherwise decline, and that, if you did that, that was considered a shameful decision by the culture. In other words, you did not have to act as the Levirate, but if you did, you were number one on the list and you refused to act as the Levirate, that was shame on you. Excuse me. And so let's go to Deuteronomy 25 and see that in play, where it's described. I'm looking at verses 7 through 10 of chapter 25 of Deuteronomy. But if the man who should have been the Levirate does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate, same place Boaz went, but different purpose here, to the elders, and say, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. In other words, she's saying, his brother refuses to be the Levirate. He refuses to take me as wife and produce a son. He's not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall summon him and speak to him. And if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, then his brother's wife, the dead brother's wife, shall come to him in the sight of the elders. We got witnesses to this. Is a legal, cultural issue. And pull his sandal off his foot. In other words, take off his shoe, and spit in his face, and she shall declare, thus it is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And in Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed. This is to shame the man as not a responsible brother. The reluctant relative was publicly disgraced for his unwillingness to be the Levirate. Now, you see that in Ruth, as Boaz continued his discussion with Naomi's closest relative, then Boaz said, on the day you buy, in other words, at first this guy says, okay, I'll buy the land back. On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. So he said, not only do you buy the land back, but you get another wife. And the closest relative, the one who should have been the kinsman redeemer, said, I cannot redeem it for myself. Now he's talking about the land. Lest I jeopardize my own inheritance. For example, suppose he has no son, but he goes in, he takes Ruth as his wife, he goes into Ruth and produces a son. That's his firstborn, right? But it's not his firstborn. It's Mahlon, Ruth's deceased husband's name. It's Mahlon's firstborn. So you see what he's saying? And what if I never produce another son? My family name goes down the tubes. So he says then, redeem it, the land and Ruth, for yourself. You may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. He said yes to the land, no to Ruth, when she was made a part of the deal. And the decision of both men was made a public record that day. The one said no, And Boaz said, I will do it. Let's go back to Ruth in chapter 4, starting in verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land. To confirm any matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another. We saw that a minute ago. In one case, it is just simply an acknowledgement that the deal is made. In the other case, it's an acknowledgement of the shame of the man who refused to do it. And he gives it to another. This was the manner of attestation in Israel. That's equivalent to honorable men shaking hands. So it's that sort of thing. So the closest relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, all the witnesses, you are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to his dead sons, Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the deceased, Mahlon, on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased, Mahlon, and hence also Elimelech, not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. And all the people who were in the court and the elders said, we are witnesses. So it became law of the land. Boaz bought Naomi's land to produce it, put it back in the family control, and he took Ruth as his wife to continue the line of Mahlon and Elimelech. That son's name that did continue that line was Obed, O-B-E-D. But interestingly, who is Obed's son legally? Mahlon's. And therefore he's a descendant of Elimelech, continuing the family line. But it's rather interesting because you find Obad's name in some genealogies, particular in the genealogies of both Jesus and David. He is listed, Obed is listed in the genealogies of Jesus and David. He is listed as the son of Boaz, not Elimelech and not Mahlon. Interesting, right? So when you go looking at the genealogies in Matthew and in Luke, you find Boaz. But you find, you find Obed in that genealogy. But right before Obed, you find Boaz. So, there are two things going on. One is the line that led to David and hence to Jesus included Obed, but it also is listed as a line of Boaz. Next time, we're going to quit here. We've got through enough. But next time, we're not finished with the Levirate marriage thing yet. We're going to take a look of a very specific second example of Levirate marriage that is found in Scripture. There's a good chance you already know of it. It's a case of Levirate marriage that didn't go the way it was supposed to go. It went awry. Then we're going to visit the notion of the cities of refuge, and that'll be a revisit. We've already talked about the 6 cities of refuge, their purpose. And we're going to examine the association of the cities of refuge with the notion of another close relative, the blood avenger, or the avenger of blood, and a situation called lex talionis. That's Latin, if you care. L-E-X, second word T-A-L-I-O-N-E-S, lex talionis, which stands for the law of retribution. That's why it's tied to the blood avenger. And we're going to look at the notion also tied with lex talionis and the blood avenger, or avenger of blood, the corruption of the land by blood. So we'll be talking about those things next time. And then maybe we'll get on with moving back toward the notion of the Jubilee itself. We'll see.